Namaste. Good evening to people in Bharat. Good morning to people in the United States. Welcome to Oneness Festival. The last week of Oneness Festival is going on. And we have a special talk today on 6 inquiries to embody your essential nature of wholeness by Dr. Richard Miller. Let me introduce you to Dr. Richard Miller. He is a clinical psychologist. He has written many books. He's a researcher, yoga scholar, and spiritual teacher. And he has dedicated 54 years of his life so far in integrating the Western psychology and neuroscience with the ancient wisdom teachings of yoga, tantra, Advaita, Taoism, and Buddhism. And he has studied in Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram with Sri Deshikachar a long time ago, and he is well known to some of the people there. And he has developed a research-based program called iRest, Yoga Nidra Meditation. And then using that as the basis, he created iRest Institute. He's also co-founder of the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and he was the previous president of the Institute for Spirituality and Psychology. As I mentioned, he is an author and he has published significant number of articles, like over 50 articles, books and recordings, including Yoga Nidra, iRest meditation practice, deep relaxation and healing. And his iRest program for healing, especially PTSD, the new harbinger, and iRest meditation, Richard leads retreats and trainings internationally, emphasizing enlightened living in daily life. Please check out www.irest.org if you want to get more information. So Richard, I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation and interacting with you towards the end. Namaste. You can start your presentation.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Prasad. It's lovely to see you and be with you and everyone this evening in India. Here it's early morning in where I'm living, north of San Francisco. A beautiful, clear, sunny day. So namaste and welcome to our time together. I'm looking forward to sharing these insights which have come to me over my many decades of working with these precious teachings from Shankaracharya, from all my teachers that I've received teachings from around the world, many from India and many from here in the United States over the span of 7 decades that I've been studying and teaching these precious teachings of yoga. So I'd love to jump in because what I'd like to do today is give a meditative presentation. So it's an invitation to really come home and rest in and abide as our essential nature and its aspect of wholeness. So this isn't so much an intellectual, but as the saying goes, applied Vedanta. So just as a way of introducing, in one of his texts, Adi Shankaracharya in the Drigdrishya Viveka, he really informs us that everything is actually a facet of unity. What our eyes perceive as separate objects, what our senses perceive as separate tastes or smells, sights, sensations, and what our mind perceives as thoughts. From the view of Advaita, all of these are basically consciousness, expressions of their underlying essence. This, that is, underlying everything, I like the word mystery, because it's really ineffable. We can't define it conceptually through words, but we can experience it. And there are 6 wonderful inquiries that I've come to understand and share with people that can provide us a gateway or a portal, you might say, into awakening to this unified essence we may call consciousness, we may call pure awareness, we may call it pure being, and its associated expressions, which encompass love and joy and a deep-seated well-being, all of which we can come upon very easily, which is what I'd like to share with you today. Often, when we engage in meditation, we are seeking some goal that may seem distant, far off in the future, enlightenment, awakening to our true nature. Yet the teachings reveal that we can come and have a glimpse, a deep understanding right from the very start. And if this is so, then we're not meditating to become consciousness. We're meditating from our already awakened understanding and realization of consciousness itself. And this is what I'd like to invite us all in to today. So with that as a preamble, and we'll have time at the end for any of your reflections or questions. And if you do have something, you can put it into the chat box, and Prasad will be combing the chat box to see what reflections or questions you may have. So I'd love you to, with your eyes open or closed, just rest back in a comfortable position that you find yourself in. And let your senses open to the environment and sounds around you. As you're doing this, set attention free to wander as it will. We're not trying to control the mind. We're not trying to control attention. And as you set attention freely to wander about, notice how it may linger momentarily on a particular object, like a sound. Might be a body sensation or an emotion, perhaps a thought. But notice how it jumps from object to object, lingering sometimes on one for a period of time and then jumping to another. Just take a moment and notice the movement of attention that is unfolding in your awareness. As Shankara points out in his texts, the objects that attention is noticing are constantly changing. And the senses that are registering the objects are equally constantly changing. And the thoughts that make up the mind, aren't they also equally coming and going, constantly changing? Yet there's something here from which we're perceiving the constantly changing, which we might call the unchanging aspect of consciousness itself. So again, we're not trying to control the mind. We're not trying to stop thoughts. We're not trying to withdraw the senses. We're setting all of these in this moment to be free just as they are and to function and operate as they're designed. And as you're resting here, we all know the sense of simply being. When it's a lovely day and you've completed your tasks and you're simply sitting back for a moment with nothing particular to do, there's a moment where we settle into the simple feeling of just being. So I invite you now to just rest back for a moment in this simple feeling of being, noticing as you do, where and how in your body do you register or feel this simple feeling of being? Nothing to do, nowhere to be, just a moment of simply being. And I have 6 inquiries which I'd like to share. The first inquiry, and I want you to answer them from your first-hand knowing. So you may have read books before, heard teachers expound on this. But in this moment, I'd like you to consult your own first-hand understanding. And that we're answering these questions from our felt sense of being. So the first inquiry, when you're simply being, where is your innermost core center as being? And where is your outermost border or boundary? Especially if you momentarily close your eyes and you're simply being. Where is the center of being? And where is its outermost border or periphery? Take a moment and just feel into this, not with your thinking mind, but with your firsthand knowing. And you begin to sense how being has both a localized, felt sense about it. We know it through our body. And yet, when we feel into being, especially if our eyes are momentarily closed, the borders and boundaries of the body give way to a field-like quality of being, where being can suddenly open up into its quality of spaciousness, openness. So take a moment, if you will, and just feel these different qualities that being has, both a localized, felt sense about it, you recognize being, and its more non-local, spacious openness. Here, the borders and boundaries of the body may give way to our inherent, innate sense of spacious openness. Then the second inquiry, as you're settling and resting more and more in just this simple feeling of being, notice what's happening to the thinking mind and thoughts. And we can inquire similarly, what's happening to your sense of time as you settle more and more into simply feeling yourself as being. You may be experiencing how the mind begins to settle a bit. Thoughts attenuate a bit. The mind settles down And because we're stepping out of thought, as we settle more and more into the felt sense of being, we equally step out of time. When we're simply being, we might say we're abiding as something that is outside of time itself. Past, future, even present are concepts. But when we let go of all concepts and we feel back into this simple felt sense of being, we come upon something about ourselves that is not just timeless, but is truly outside of time as being. The third inquiry, which we'd like to make, is as being, when you identify yourself as and with being, as being, do you feel any sense of lack or need or want? Does being itself lack for anything, need for anything, want for anything? Take a moment and just feel into this inquiry. As being, are you lacking anything? And perhaps you may begin to feel how being itself lies outside of lack, outside of need, outside of want. Something about ourselves, we might say, is a basic okayness, a basic perfection, something that feels harmonious just in and of itself. We often come to meditation feeling something's lacking in our life, or a sense of suffering, something that's broken. But as you feel back into being, can you sense how being is always whole, never broken, and in a manner of speaking, in no need of healing? So take a moment and just feel into your basic ground of okayness that's outside of lack, outside of need, outside of want, perfect, just as you are as being. The fourth inquiry that these teachings offer us, as being, is being familiar or unfamiliar? Can you feel how being is something that you've always known, perhaps haven't nourished much in your life, but in this moment, as you feel into your basic ground of being, how it's something that's always present, though often is unrecognized, but as we feel into it, we can sense it's always been here as a background essence, perhaps. But as you feel being coming into the foreground of your present experience, can you feel the aliveness or the sense of connection that it engenders in you? As being, we might ask, as being, do you need anything? Do you lack for anything? Is being familiar? And as you nourish this felt sense of being within yourself, can you feel how it more deeply connects you to yourself? But equally, if you let your eyes softly open and gaze at some object around you with a soft gaze, and it could be a object in the room or the environment where you are, it could be a tree outside, it could be simply a wall out in front of you. But if you let your peripheral vision open, so you're equally aware left and right, in front as behind, below as above, inside and outside. So let attention momentarily feel everywhere and nowhere specific. Where you can feel perhaps this field we call being pervades, touches, and may be the underlying essence of everything that you see. When you don't name the object that you're looking at, and you rest in a moment of pure perceiving, we may begin to feel how being is a pervading field that connects everything as a unified essence. And the fifth inquiry is being something that you're doing, or is its own doing? Can you feel how being doesn't need a doer? That it's innate, ever present, unchanging, yet always fresh. Again, with your eyes open or softly closed, but having a sense of your peripheral vision open to all directions. This pervasive field of being that pervades not just your body, but the environment around you. And as you feel into being, can you sense how it is a quality that is unchanging, ever present, even when it's unrecognized, does not negate it, it's still here. The moment we turn attention into being, it knowingly shows itself. And that therefore being isn't something that we're producing or that we're generating or doing. It is its own doing, we might say, and it knowingly knows itself as itself. It doesn't need the thinking mind. So let me take you back through these 5 inquiries, and then I'll add a 6, which is the first inquiry. As being, where is your absolute core center and your absolute outer border, boundary, or periphery? Without going into the thinking mind, just your own firsthand knowing how being is a field, spacious, open. And we might say something about being is even beyond a sense of openness or spaciousness, which are simply concepts of the mind. If we let go of conceptual thinking and we simply abide as being, there can be the recognition of something about us that is outside of all border, boundary, center. So we come upon our open spaciousness in this first inquiry. The second inquiry, when we're simply being, what happens to our sense of time? Can you sense how when we're abiding as being, we're outside of time? We can watch then thoughts coming and going, but there's a spontaneous disidentification that can happen now from thinking and from the sense of concepts like time. And we find ourselves abiding as something that is outside, we might say, of conceptual thinking, outside of time. So feel that sense about yourself that is outside of time, outside of the thinking mind. Then we might see how thoughts, sensory impressions, are coming and going, but they don't negate their underlying sense of being. So the third inquiry was that question, as being, do you lack or need or want for anything as being? And we can feel how being, something about us, is outside of lack, need, or want. And we may say is incapable of being hurt or injured, and therefore isn't in need of healing. So let's not mistake the body, the senses, and the mind for our essential nature. Let us recognize the quality of being so that we understand something about us is always okay, never in need of healing, hasn't been touched, tainted, or hurt. So from here in our ground of being, we can address the body or the mind, which may in fact have been injured or in need of healing. But let's not mistake that I need healing, but it is the body and the mind that may need attention. This fourth inquiry has to do with connection. As we abide as being, can you feel how you feel an ever deepening sense of connectedness with your own body and mind, your own sense of self? But if we feel out as we abide more and more as being, we can feel a deeper underlying essence that pervades everything, and we might say connects and unifies everything, and we feel our innate interconnectedness with everything, others, nature, trees, mountains. So if you momentarily open your eyes and look about, how the eyes and the senses and the mind perceive separate objects. But if you attune and stay as being in the midst of the mind or the senses and the eyes, creating a sense of separation, we can simultaneously feel an underlying essence that isn't divided, isn't separate. We might say is the underlying essence out of which everything is arising, unfolding, and folding back into. So as we're abiding as this simple feeling of being, this fifth question, inquiry is being something that we're doing, or can we feel how it's something that is doing itself? It doesn't need a doer. Doesn't need a thinking mind. And it knowingly knows and recognizes itself as itself. So as we abide now in this simple feeling of being, there's a sixth inquiry we can make, which is if someone, a friend, were to come to you later today or tomorrow and ask you, how would you describe the felt sense of being? What words might you use to another to describe your experience, your firsthand knowing of being? Just take a moment. What words spontaneously arise within you as descriptions of being? People I've worked with have described it as a sense of openness, spaciousness. A deep peace or ease, a sense of equanimity. And you use the word love. And can you see as you abide in and as being, these or other words as descriptors are never fully adequate to describe the felt sense of being. We might call them facets of unity, facets of being, love, even perhaps a touch of joy. Can you feel as you abide as the simple feeling of being? It may awaken within you a felt sense of joy or grounded well-being. where you might even come upon the smile of the Buddha that pervades the entire body as this innate joy and well-being that spontaneously arises when we knowingly abide as being. Where we may begin to feel how these qualities of being, like love, joy, equanimity, even feelings such as kindness and compassion, they're natural expressions of our innate sense of being. So they're not things that we're bringing to us, but we're letting them arise, unfold, and expand as natural expressions of our inherent true nature. The trick here, we might say, of meditation is not to leave it on the pillow or the mat, but to take it out into the world amongst our activities, our relationships, our work, our play. So take a moment and in your imagination, imagine going about the rest of your day or evening, or you're in tomorrow, going about your daily activities, but all the while this felt sense of being emanating, pervading your body, your mind, your life. You might imagine yourself in a conversation with someone, and while you're conversing, all the while feeling this underlying sense of being. Or you're at work amongst peers, workmates, or working by yourself at your computer or reading a book. And this felt sense of being is not something you're doing, but it keeps flowing out, emanating, announcing itself to you. Imagine eating a meal, all the while the felt sense of being emanating as a pervasive field. Or imagine walking down the street amongst many people, feeling this underlying sense of being that pervades everywhere. And each person you see, we might say, as a unique expression of being, as is your own personality. Where you might begin to sense how your own personality, your own sense of self arises in being. So in a way, as we abide more and more as being, we're setting our body and our mind free, our thoughts to come and go, our emotions, body sensations. And as we abide more and more just in the field of being, there's a natural reintegration that can take place, where as an emotion arises, instead of becoming reactive to it, we can feel how it's arising in being, which gives us more of an ability to respond rather than react. Similarly, you may have old conditioned beliefs or thoughts about yourself, thoughts of limitation or different beliefs. But perhaps as being, can you see how these are just arising within the field of being? Self-judgment, feelings of guilt or shame or self-blame, When we abide as being, we unhook from these different thoughts, and we may see their underlying structures that we can set free and no longer become encumbered by, and become more responsive in our actions. And as a final inquiry, if you let go of all concepts, even the notion, the thought of being, and you just take a moment to really rest in and as being before the thought being arises in your mind. So we're in a moment of just pure being before the thinking mind arises. Attention free. And you feel how something about you is everywhere, unlocalized, without border, without boundary. And a purity of well-being. We might say even love incarnate, joy incarnate. That love and joy and well-being is not something that you're doing, but are emanating as core essences of your innate ground of being. And notice that being itself is ultimately indescribable, yet recognizable. We can assign different words to it: consciousness, awareness, God, essence, being. Yet no word does justice to it. And knowingly knowing yourself as being, this becomes the ground out of which our life unfolds. Where there may be a moment as we rest ever more deeply as being, there's a shift that may occur where we feel it's no longer yourself living life, but it's life living you. It's in a way no longer my will, but thy will be done. That we tap into the rich inner resources of intelligence, intuitive wisdom that flow out of being, where as our intuitive wisdom begins to shine, we can see old patterns, old conditioned ways we've been taught or learned or have come through experience. We can see how all conditioned patterns of behavior are like contractions, but we don't have to be caught in them. We can see how they're arising in our unified field of being. So as being, in a way, we're stepping out of our conditioning, out of our conditioned habits, conditioned ways of thinking or seeing the world, and we're seeing it now with fresh eyes from an unconditioned, unchanging essence that ultimately we can't put a name on, and yet we can knowingly know it as our firsthand experience. So let's keep nourishing this felt sense of being, because nothing actually, if we inspect, can interrupt it. We can momentarily identify with a thought, a sensation, an emotion, but that being then is in the background. But the moment we stop identification with any particular thought or emotion, body sensation, we can feel how being floods back in. And we may ultimately feel how being is ever present, even when there's a moment of identification with a thought, an old conditioned way of being. The felt sense of being pervades our consciousness and helps us meet the situation with perhaps a different response that feels in harmony with life itself. So I'm going to take a few moments and check in with Prasad to see if there are any comments that might have come in through the chat box, or any comments you may have, Prasad, on this inquiry we've been doing into the nature of the mystery, I would say the essence that obviously Shankaracharya and so many wisdom teachers have exclaimed over the years, but how simple it is if we can momentarily just put aside our daily life and just rest in this very simple feeling of being. So any reflections or thoughts on your behalf?
Thank you very much, Richard. I could begin to dissolve even the thoughts, feelings, questions, and the identity that I normally associate with. And in the beginning, I tried to look from a localized state of me as Prasad, looking at the world that is out there, which I consider as not Prasad. But as we went through different inquiries, and as I began to look at it, the eye that is looking was becoming faded. And there was only looking. There was no eye looking.
I think you're bringing up an exquisite point, because actually there's just seeing, just looking. There isn't an I, although the I then comes in and appropriates it and says,
Yes.
I'm looking. But in fact, in the moment of hearing, there's just hearing. In the moment of seeing, there's just seeing. And that can bring us back into our basic ground of being.
So while you did not bring in the identity or ahankar or the idea of aham bhavam or any of these, the self-sense, I think, interesting. When I say I think, there is a certain identity I'm bringing in, but as you use the word intuition, that you brought it very distinct from the instinct that I have from my feelings or from my beliefs or from my past or anything else. But the intuition just arises, and as I catch hold of it and call it mine, then it becomes mine. But if I don't, I don't. So that connects with some of the questions that some people are raising, like Mahesh ji is saying, so in the beingness, does the mind get transcended? So the question is, how does one transcend the mind?
And as we can feel, as we rest as being, the mind we can see is something that's arising in being.
Right.
So in a way, we're not transcending the mind as much as we're feeling how the mind is just an arising in and out of us. And so in a way, there's no issue here. The mind
Yeah.
is just thoughts coming and going, and we can, we can attend to them or not. But in that moment of resting as being, to use the word, we have then ultimately transcended the mind and, as you're pointing out so beautifully, the sense of self. And then we can see how the sense of self arises and grabs on or sticks to whatever else is arising. So in the morning, we wake up and really there's just a feeling of hunger.
Yeah.
But then the I thought comes in and says, I'm hungry, or I want to go to the movies. One of the experiments I often ask my students to engage for an hour or a day is to not use the word I, me, mine, you,
Right.
yours, or they. And
Right.
so imagine the phone rings, and on the other end of the line, somebody says, hunger is arising here. Wanting to go to a restaurant is happening. What's happening over there? And we can see that without using the word I, me, or mine, we come into a whole different way of understanding ourselves.
As a
And
matter of fact, as you say it, even Mahesh Ji, as I look at his first comment, to second comment, to third comment, to fourth comment, I can see he says, in the beingness, does the mind get transcended? The second point he brings up is, so the question is, how does one transcend the mind? Then the third point he brings up is, so the sense of being, is it the ground state? And then he brings it to the fourth point. He says, can I remain in beingness permanently? Of course,
now,
bringing in that element of time. So
and
therefore,
yeah.
can I overcome karma? Please.
So here's the recognition. Can I remain in being all the time? And I would say, you have never not been in being. And it's not something that you abide in, but
Yeah.
as you let go of the thought of you, being flushes into the foreground naturally, and we can recognize how it's always been here. It is
Right.
our basic ground.
Right.
And then we can see how that I thought comes in, and then it says, I'm being.
Right.
But if we see how the I is an addition, and there's a beautiful statement that has been made by a fellow by the name of Gazzaniga in a book he wrote called The Mind's Past. But he says, the I thought always comes late to the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see how that, say we have a feeling or a sensation
Right.
or whatever, and then the I thought comes in late and grabs a hold of it.
Right.
So if we remain and abide as being, we can watch how the mind works and no longer be caught in it.
Right.
And then it becomes more a tool,
Right.
and it empties out of the conditioned patterns. And now we really tap into what you brought up a moment ago, Prasad, the
Mm-hmm.
innate intelligence that gives rise to intuition that is unencumbered by conditioning. And we have a more ability to have pure responses
Right.
and right action and right speech that just flow out of our beingness
Yeah.
when we abide as it. So I would say, to one further remark, the more we attend to being and nourish it, we might say, into our conscious awareness, there comes a moment where there's a reversal of fortune, where instead of being in the background, it's all of a sudden in the foreground throughout our day. Even as we're sleeping, when we awaken, we can feel how it was there the whole night long, the whole day long. So I would say, make it your earnestness to
Mm.
nourish and abide and keep coming back to being. And then one day there will be that true feeling of it is ever present. And it's not me who is abiding, it is being that is abiding in its own nature.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And there are a few more comments and questions that come up. Of course, there is a question of, is beingness, does it mean, are we free from the chemistry of our brain? So the neurological perspective, maybe you can bring in a little bit, Richard.
When we abide knowingly as being for longer and longer periods, and this is really what meditation brings, we set aside our normal activities and we sit and we really in a not doing, because we're not doing being. So to really recognize being is its own doing, it has an effect, I would say, chemically on our entire body. Every cell we can feel begins to shift and change and come out of its conditioned way of being. And there's a freedom that naturally arises. So I would say, yes, indeed, there's a profound change that happens at a cellular level as we abide and rest as being. And then eventually we'll go to engage in an old habit pattern and it no longer feels right. And we just set it aside. And so we find ourselves naturally growing into right action, right speech, a right way of being that feels in harmony with the sense of being. Because the more we attune to being, the more we can feel the subtle contractions of conditioning that no longer make sense to engage in. And so there's a profound reorganization and reintegration, I would say, both at the chemical level and then at the psychological level as we abide in being.
Wonderful. There is a question, says, when I feel the sense of being in others, in the similar way, can I get into animals, birds, and mountains and feel the presence of being there also? That becomes a unifying thing.
Another aspect of meditation, which is sometimes just sit with a tree and peel off the label that you've assigned, that your mind assigns to the tree, and you'll find that the tree underlying is being, and you're being, and then it's being meeting being, and there's just a field of being. And you can do that with a rock, you can do that with an animal, you can do it with any animate or inanimate object, where you begin to feel that being, this quality essence, is the underlying substance of everything. And as I said during my presentation, our eyes are still going to perceive separate objects along with the mind. That's what they're designed to do. But now we can feel the underlying essence as well. And so in effect, while it seems that Richard Miller and Prasad are face to face, it's actually essence to essence. And so we meet then everything from our essence, recognizing them or each object as essence itself, which awakens a quality of love and caring and compassion for everything in a way that comes very unexpected, where we no longer see other, we just see forms of ourself. And if everything is perceived as ourself, then why wouldn't we want to be kind and loving and compassionate? Because we're meeting ourselves in this form, as a tree, as a tiger, as a monkey, as an object, whatever.
So that answers many questions Mr. Raghavan had brought up, saying, is there a unification with everything around? Is there a silence and acceptance? Yes, yes. Do we transcend every object around us? The question is, do we, is the part. Every object and we are, when we operate from that state of ground of being, then...
because there's a shift of identity from a localized I that's separate to a unified felt sense of being. And in that identification shift, we do feel a unified field underlying everything.
Yeah, so the being of being is not just our consciousness, is just consciousness. So we can call it our, or we can call it your, but it comes down to... There is a Dr. Richard from UK, Richard Patini. He says, thanks, Richard, from identifying Ramesh Patini, Dr. Ramesh Patini. So now I'm already losing the identification of who is asking the question and who is answering. He says, Dr. Ramesh says, from identified phenomena to interpretation, back to the phenomena in themselves is a simple unifying awareness. I think he puts it in his words. You have any comment? You want to add something to that?
The main thing is we can call it anything: pure awareness, consciousness, God, essence, pure being. At some point, we want to tear off all the labels, give up all the concepts, and just rest in this that is ultimately indescribable. And then we can bring out labels, but the labels can then kind of create confusion because people use words in different ways. But yeah, we're talking about an experience that in a way isn't an experience, because we're recognizing our essential nature here that's always present, and that we can rest in, or we're resting in it all day long. It is our essential self. So yeah, we can call it awareness, consciousness, God, but it is that one unifying source in which everything is made out of.
Yeah, that's why they talk about the nama, rupa, guna, atita consciousness. So when we talk about the name, the nama, we get into the different identification consciousness. And then when we bring the rupa, then we get into the consciousness of the eyes and the vision. And guna, then the judgment and the beliefs, and some of them come into that. So
and the recognition here then is, as we abide more knowingly as being, we can now use nama, rupa, we can use names and forms, but we're no longer getting caught in them. We recognize them just for what they are: names, forms arising in this global field of essence.
Right. So one question, Mr. Jag Goyal says, what is outside of time? So obviously, you are addressing it, but can you address it specifically so that he will get his version?
Time is a concept. Time actually doesn't exist except as a mental concept.
Right.
So when we feel into the ground of being, we step out of the thinking mind, and so we're not timeless then, because timeless is still in time. We're actually outside of all concept. And as we knowingly abide outside of concept long enough, we can see how concepts are just a contraction, we might say, unfolding in the vaster field of our beingness. So now we can use the concept time psychologically or physically. I'll see you at 3 o'clock or whatever, no problem.
Yeah.
But we know our true essence has nothing to do with time. We are outside of time, which then, interestingly, places us out of birth and out of death. And so as we abide into being, we have a deep inquiry into what is birth, what is death, all these different aspects. We can begin to feel how they're just concepts, and we come into something that is outside, unborn, unconditioned, unbecome, and we rest there knowingly.
Yeah, and as a physicist, I can relate to the quantum physics of the time backward, the arrow of time being backward and forward. It relates to many of the quantum questions. And so the quantum physics, brain research, Vedanta, all of them are coming together. And thank you for creating that unified way of experiencing it, like a first-person research that we can explore. Thank you very much.
We are each then our own laboratory.
Exactly. We are in our own laboratory, and we are constantly, when we can observe that, and it is wonderful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful session. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Prasad, for being my host. And I thank Nithin as well, and the Indic for sponsoring this and the Oneness Festival. So thank you everyone for coming on this journey with me. I hope you'll join me on others. Please visit my website, irest.org, and I look forward to perhaps seeing you for tea in the marketplace sometime.
So if they want to contact you, they can go to irest.org and then connect with you at that time.
Yes.
Thank you. So you have a great day, Richard. I'm also going to do the same, and we will say bye to people in Europe and India and United States and everywhere else. Thank you for participating today in the Oneness Festival and enjoying a wonderful experience of being through Richard. So please tune in again tomorrow morning in India time, and this evening in United States time. And we have another great talk by Swamini Satyavratananda, and the topic is the unreality of world as per Advaita. So that is what we have, and it is almost the last part of the festival. All of the festival talks from morning, evening, all of them are available on YouTube. Please search for it in Indica channels or the Advaita Academy channels. Thank you, and good day and good night.